Okay, everyone, welcome back to One and a Half, a modern history podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jordan Wilson.
And I'm your co-host, Kennedy Bunton.
And today our question comes from Aiden Jones. Kennedy, would you like to read our question?
Yeah, so Aiden Jones said, "My grandma is a very religious person. However, her beliefs were greatly impacted by COVID-19. What were some similar events in history that related to COVID?"
So Aiden, an event that actually was just like COVID was Black Death. And Black Death was a devastating global pandemic, a bubonic plague that killed an estimate of 75 to 200 million in Europe, Asia, and Africa between the 1300s.
So how was that transmitted between people?
So actually it was transmitted by fleas that lived on rodents, and it passed bacteria just to humans. Then eventually how it got to continent was humans, they would travel and they would trade and, with skin-to-skin contact or airborne. That's how the disease grew so rapidly.
And if I'm not mistaken, they were fleeing too, right? And there was a bunch of people who were trying to get into this one port city.
Right.
And because that's where the ships were, so they could leave. And that's kind of where it was being bred on such
Correct.
a great level. Mm-hmm. And then they got on these boats and went to so many different places because they were trying to escape the plague, but they already had it.
Exactly.
And so it just transmitted. And that's kind of similar to how COVID was spread so rapidly.
Because it eventually started in Asia, and then it worked its way to different continents.
Yeah. I remember one of my family friends brought it back from Europe when he went, and that was pretty frustrating. So what were some symptoms that people had when they caught this disease?
So some symptoms included, swellings, dark patches, and coughing up blood.
And that spread pretty rapidly between people, right? It would wipe out a lot of colonies and towns in just a few days.
Right.
So what were some effects on those towns that had people catch this disease?
So in a way, it actually kind of weakened faith, and it caused a lot of uprisings because people were afraid and they were scared. So a lot of chaos, and it actually weakened faith within the church, and they thought God was punishing them. So they didn't have social media like us, so they were just freaking out, and they were just why is this happening? And that was kind of their first instinct was to be oh, God is punishing us. So this did cause a lot of radical religious movements, or just a lot of outbreaks, people being very upset and just kind of scared because they weren't really sure what this new disease was. How we kind of knew what COVID was, they didn't really have any clue because this was something new.
Yeah, I remember when we were learning about this, it said a lot of people lost faith in the church, and then other people, it made them gain even more faith. We had people walking around whipping themselves in the streets.
Right.
So it just seems in both directions, if you went further away from the church or closer to it, it was in such a radical way.
Right.
There was no just medium of oh, I'm going to go to church more. It was very extreme on both ends.
Agreed.
Do you think that was kind of the same for COVID?
I would say it was the same for COVID because just like COVID, you had people that were kind of hey, why is this happening to me? Or why am I getting this type of disease? And then with some people, they grew a closer relationships to God. So I think between Black Death and COVID, there are so many different similarities when you kind of look at the spectrum of it.
Nice, okay.
So are there any more diseases that you can think of that are kind of similar to Black Death or COVID?
One major disease that I can think of that was similar to the Black Death and COVID was the smallpox epidemic.
So what were some symptoms of smallpox?
You had a high fever, rash, deep pustules, and scabs. And once you got it once, then you got, once you had it once, you just, you wouldn't be able to get it again.
So where exactly did smallpox come from, and how did it, start to spread between people, or how did it, become this big disease?
It was carried by Spanish and Portuguese explorers, soldiers, and enslaved Africans. And when they brought it over here, the indigenous populations had no prior exposure, so therefore they didn't have any immunity. And that caused the mortality to reach to about 50 to 90% in certain indigenous communities. And that caused massive social collapse, loss of leaders, farmers, healers, and warriors. And it weakened empires such as the Aztec Empire, which helped the Spanish conquest when they came over and they were trying to colonize these people. And another empire it weakened was the Inca Empire.
So were there any impacts on humans, or how did, this disease impact societies itself?
So we saw a breakdown of a lot of these Native American societies. Losing their leaders and their warriors was pretty catastrophic, and it caused them to really be confused about if their gods were angry with them or, just what was going on. And it made it really easy for these European military conquests to just come in and take over. And we saw the epidemic spread far beyond initial European contact zones. And we saw it move through trade routes and indigenous networks. So it really broke down not only these communities, but their connections with other indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm. And then would you say that this kind of also, back to COVID and Black Death, do you think it had like a religious like impact or?
Yeah, for sure. I think it made it a lot easier for these Spanish settlers to come in and say, your God isn't working. Like, if you follow our God, then this is going to stop. Because these were the people who were giving them this disease, so obviously they could stop the contact with the disease and really kind of manipulate these people's minds into changing their either political or religious views.
I like that take. So those are two great examples of two past events that do relate to COVID. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, we actually have a guest speaker on our podcast that is a modern epidemic specialist. So just want to invite him on, and he can talk about one that was more recent.
Well, hey guys, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for being here. So today our topic, we're talking about, events that relate to COVID-19. Are there any events that you know of that relate to COVID-19?
Well, looking at most modern cases, I'd say AIDS would be the first thing to come to mind. The AIDS epidemic that happened in America around 1981.
Okay, so how exactly, did AIDS come to be, or how did it spread?
Well, it was first identified in Los Angeles, and it was predominantly found within homosexual men, mostly young and healthy ones. The key reason why it spread was there was a lack of understanding. There was no early testing, as HIV tests didn't exist until way later. And so transmission routes usually involved unprotected sex, shared needles, blood transfusions. Slow government response was the main reason why it spread so far. A lot of people just didn't care or didn't know or cared to know why it was spreading.
So what exactly were the symptoms of AIDS?
Most people that saw it or got it would see extreme fatigue, rapid weight loss, fevers, night sweats, severe infections, and rare cancers as well. And you'd also get certain infections such as pneumonia, thrush, which is like a fungal infection, or tuberculosis.
So how exactly do you think that these symptoms, had an impact on people, or did they even have an impact on people?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but there was a big impact on just America in general. There was a lot of kind of a divide between conservative Americans and obviously the LGBT community at the time. There was this disparity because there was kind of this homophobic guarantee that if there's a gay man, he has this virus. That wasn't obviously the case, but it caused a big divide between communities, framing disease as immoral and kind of using that to justify God's wrath on homoerotic people. And kind of say it was justified what they were going through as they were sinners, quote unquote.
So how would you relate AIDS back to COVID? What were some similarities between the two?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of similarities. I mean, especially with the public reaction to each epidemic respectively. For AIDS, you saw people pointing fingers and kind of fear-mongering and being afraid of homosexual men and pointing their finger at them. And you saw the same thing with the American public with China. As COVID was identified in Wuhan, you definitely saw a lot of American xenophobia towards the country. And another thing you could say is kind of the religious views that were impacted, because I know that's the topic. So for AIDS, for example, a lot of people kind of justified what was happening to these two gay men as God's retribution, as they consider that a sin.
So I know that we've related a lot of these diseases back to COVID, but could you just give me a brief overview of what COVID was and how it impacted the world?
Of course. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
No, I mean, I'm sure most people watching this know, they were probably there for it, but it showed up in 2019. It kind of went under the radar for most of the time because the symptoms in younger people were mainly kind of cold. Yeah, something chill, not bad, But you'd see a sore throat, congestion, fatigue, muscle body aches, headaches. I lost my sense of taste, and people lost sense of smell and stuff like that. So a lot of people were affected in different ways, and a lot of the times you wouldn't even see symptoms until 2 weeks after you had it. So that's part of the reason why it spread so fast.
How would you say that COVID-19 affected the culture of the world at the time?
Yeah, no, I mean, the world at the time was never more dependent on globalization and being
connected.
Yeah, and dependent on one another. And so when you saw these widespread lockdowns, these travel restrictions, the masks, I mean, everyone was just so like flustered. It was just a whole change of lifestyle for everybody. You know, there was no more like publicity anymore. You were just trapped inside your house for who knew how long. So, you know, it would definitely cause a lot of like fear and like, I don't know how to deal with this new world I'm in. So a lot of people kind of depended on the internet. We saw a lot of people kind of feel lonely and turn to things that technology in that way.
Yeah, and with that, like turning to the internet, we saw a lot of kind of tension between both sides of like politics, and we saw a lot of people hoarding, and we saw a lot of people spreading hate and also love. Like we had a big movement of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so yeah, just I could definitely see how that affected the community.
Yeah, no, people coped in different ways a lot. I mean, in many different ways, sorry. You know, obviously with a more interconnected online, there was more people understanding more views that they hadn't heard or seen before. You know, we can tie that into religion as well. A lot of people in America, like Christians and stuff, that like they couldn't kind of meet anymore with the lockdown. They couldn't meet in person, and a lot of them questioned how like they should worship or if it's okay to not go to church every Sunday.
Yeah, and with that, we saw a lot of deconstruction of faith between a lot of different religions.
You know, a lot of people coped in different ways, some good, you know, utilizing online services, platforms to communicate with one another.
All right, well, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, no, I hope I answered Aiden's question. And, you know, it's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to meet you guys. And, you know, have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, at the end of every episode, as you guys know, we like to include our take on how what we discuss ties into the global culture and identity as a whole. Kennedy, take it away.
So, you know, people have always gravitated towards being in a group and sharing beliefs and ideas. We can see this shown in trading between tribes, hunting in groups, and deciding to go to the library with your friends. This can bring a great sense of bonding and community, but it can also cause strains in our society. People become afraid of what they don't know, which leads to fighting and hate. I think it's been shown time and time again with all these different epidemics that we react in the same way. So, you know, history repeats itself, and hopefully we can just take these examples, and the next time it happens, we can react in a better and healthier way for our society.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, any closing remarks?
Well, thank you, Aiden Jones, for reaching out and giving us this great question. You know, we had a great time answering your question, and we hope that you got the answer that you were looking for.
All right, 1.5 out.
Peace.